Watch right now on the Front News project. A powerful attack by the Ukrainian armed forces, the destruction of Russia's 8th Guards Army. The commander of the war criminals has been eliminated. Putin wants to land troops in Odessa. Ukrainian warriors are ready to defend the Pearl by the Sea. 100 drones a day. Russia is ramping up UAV production. There will be plenty of work for air defense. Watch fiery, intense and blazing footage from the front lines right now. It's the 4th year of the full-scale war that Putin's Russia started on Ukrainian soil. The Ukrainian armed forces continue to heroically defend not only their homeland but the entire civilized world from the aggression of Kremlin war criminals. Greetings! This is Front News. I'm Volodymyr Timoshenko. In the next 30 minutes, you'll get the truth about the war brought to you by our journalists from the hottest combat zones. So, are you ready? Then, let's get started. And we're starting right away with exclusive material. The Ukrainian armed forces struck the headquarters of Russia's 8th Combined Arms Army in Donetsk. It is already known that its commander, Colonel Ruslan Horyachkin, has been killed. This very 8th Guards Army carries out a large number of important military tasks for the Kremlin, so a strike on its headquarters will have a serious negative impact on the entire occupying army. Details to follow. Let's watch! The building is destroyed, the headquarters wiped out. A day later, details are beginning to emerge about the recent strike by the Ukrainian armed forces on Russian military facilities in the occupied territories. Thus, the General Staff confirmed a hit on the command post of Russia's 8th Combined Arms Army.
The building there was really blown apart. The soldiers were sitting there, holding meetings, but they probably won't be doing that anymore. They're probably saying again, Donbass is being bombed and so on.
At the same time, the Ukrainian Armed Forces Command notes that the strike was delivered right during a work meeting. As a result, as of today, control over the 8th Army has been lost. They're trying to hold the situation together, with commanders on the ground, but the usual centralized leadership is absent. No operational planning is being conducted.
It's clear that the target was the immediate rear. Naturally, significant and impactful strikes were consistently carried out on the immediate and operational rear areas to effectively weaken the enemy forces within the occupied territories, specifically in the crucial Pokrovsk and Lyman directions, with the clear and strategic objective to truly and completely disrupt their vital supply lines.
At the same time, the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces is not fully disclosing what exactly was used to carry out the strike. Meanwhile, panic is already spreading in Russian Z communities.
Yesterday, Russian war correspondents suddenly started taking pictures, photographing the outlines of a missile. Someone even filmed it flying by, and they began to shriek, "What's going on? Those are Taurus missiles flying, Taurus missiles. How does Ukraine have Taurus missiles?" I looked at it. It looks like a Taurus, but not quite. Of course, I'd like to believe that, but to be fair, when those Z-War correspondents in Crimea started wailing that we were being hit by ATAC MS, we didn't have any such information. Remember, that's when Biden secretly handed them over. That's when it all started. Well, we'll see. Let's wait and see.
Both the aftermath of the destruction and the target that was hit suggest that the strike may have been carried out with Taurus missiles. After all, as it turned out, not only the leadership of the 8th Army died under the rubble, but also the newly appointed Chief of Staff, Ruslan Horyachkin.
So, this missile blasted right through the roof, all the way down, 9 or 10 floors, and exploded in the basement. In other words, everything down there was completely buried. Yeah, there are a lot of Kias, a lot of WIS, but not many wounded. Because, like I said, the blast was so powerful, the pressure and everything. That's it. But what's interesting is that it turned out it wasn't just a random hit at that very moment. That's when the strike happened. Turns out they were being watched and targeted. The acting commander of the 8th Combined Arms Army, who was present at that particular moment in time, was indeed there.
Analysts also point out another detail here. Horyachkin, holding the rank of colonel, was serving in a position meant for at least a lieutenant general, if not higher. This means that the Russian officer corps is currently facing a severe shortage. To confirm this, Izvestia reports that the Kremlin is planning to reopen about 15 military academies that were closed after the collapse of the USSR. The program is planned to run until 2034 and includes the opening of 15 academies, where officers will be trained as pilots, tank operators, medics, and also as drone specialists. Meanwhile, an unprecedented campaign has already begun in the media to recruit recent high school graduates into the military. The motivation is the usual: money, respect, and benefits. There is also a special note reminding you that this is your only chance to make it in life. What goes unmentioned is that it's also a chance to die. For many, a military education is the only way to climb the career ladder. At the same time, those who have already put the noose around their necks by deciding to become officers in Putin's Russia are sharing their impressions online after a couple of years of training. They say it's like the gangs of the 90s here, it's easier to get in than to get out. According to the contract, you can no longer leave the academy, and after graduation, you're obligated to spend 5 years on assignments for the Ministry of Defense. If you do decide to drop out, you'll have to buy your way out, and that sum is far from affordable for most people.
All the expenses that were spent on you on food, meals, education, your stipend, even during your vacation time, you'll have to reimburse all of that. If you want to drop out in your 4th year, you have to pay back about, well, $1 million, and only then will you be allowed to leave. And even then, once you leave, you'll be drafted into the army.
But, of course, the advertisements for military universities don't mention any of this. An extremely militarized Russia only plans to increase the number of military personnel. This year, for example, they are expected to announce admissions to the newly established Saratov and Nizhny Novgorod Military Engineering School.
And now it's time to analyze the operational situation on the much-suffering Pokrovsk front line. Here, too, the situation is, as usual, extremely tense.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
On the Pokrovsk front, there were 30 combat engagements in the areas of the settlements of Mirnoye, Novotoretskoye, Mirolubovka, Malinovka, Luch, Udachnoye, Novosergievka, Orekovoye, Alexievka, Dakhnaya, and in the direction of Mirnograd and Sofievka, where 5 combat engagements are still ongoing. At the same time, enemy aircraft carried out strikes with guided bombs on the settlements of Poltavka, Belitskoye, Mirnograd, Novopavlovka, and Dakhnoye. And now about yet another genocide committed by Putin's Russia, a brutal shelling of Ukraine's Pearl by the Sea Odessa. 2 people were killed and 14 wounded. These are the consequences of yet another treacherous night attack on the city. 1 enemy UAV crashed into a high-rise building. Naturally, a fire broke out. TSN journalist Olena Chernieva will report on the rescue operation and the results of yet another Russian war crime.
This building collapsed.
A Shahed drone flew straight into the building. After the explosion, a fire started. The flames engulfed 3 floors.
We just grabbed whatever we could and ran.
There really wasn't any time to think. In the morning, we managed to grab some things and leave. Now we've come back to pick up our belongings. Everything was blown out, thrown everywhere. Well, it's devastation.
Gunshots started nearby. I went to the kitchen to close the window. As I approached, the glass immediately started falling. A flash, a burst of light, and the windows, the glass went flying.
Yes, it was terrifying. I wouldn't wish this on anyone.
There's an underground parking lot here, right under the building. Many residents were hiding there. But unfortunately, the residents of the apartment on the 9th floor, where the drone hit directly, were at home. A teacher from the Odessa Lyceum and her husband were killed.
A woman was screaming there.
A woman was screaming there, and after about 5 minutes, she went silent. Well, as I understood it, her door got stuck and she burned there or something like that. And through the flames, you could hear everything, just silhouettes visible. Toxic black smoke was spreading quickly through the building. Many people couldn't get out of their apartments.
People were trapped in their apartments, and it was very difficult to reach them because of the heavy smoke and extremely high temperatures. Some residents signaled rescuers using flashlights from their apartments. This helped them understand where to search.
Rescuers freed 5 residents, including a 3-year-old child. The search operation continued until morning. No more people were found in the blocked apartments. In the morning, residents began returning to their homes, but only to collect their belongings. After all, the affected entrance is currently unfit for living. There is no electricity or water anywhere in the building.
I don't know where we will stay. Everything is wet, there's no light. It's just a nightmare in there. I don't know where we are gonna live. There are simply no words, but we are alive. The children didn't hear it, and that's the most important thing.
The apartment was completely destroyed by fire and the blast wave across 3 floors. The lower floors are flooded with water, doors and windows have been blown out. The final damage is still being assessed. Experts need to determine how badly the building structure has been affected. 6 injured people remain in hospitals. 2 adults and a child are in serious condition.
And now we move to the Huliaipol, Orekiv, and Pridniprovsk directions of the front. The Russian world continues to destroy, kill, and maim here as well. In the Huliaipol direction, the enemy tried once to advance near Novozlatopil. Ukrainian defenders repelled one attack by the invaders toward Novopavlivka in the Orekiv direction. In the Pridniprovsk direction, defense forces successfully repelled one enemy attack. Yes, as you have already seen today, Putin continues to brutally shell Ukraine's Pearl by the Sea Odessa. And of course, occupying this city is one of his main priorities in the war against Ukraine. This is evidenced by analysis from the Institute for the Study of War and recent statements from Kremlin propagandists claiming that Odessa is supposedly a Russian city. Right now, we will tell you about the prospects of these expansionist plans of the Russian dictator. Russia is planning to occupy Odessa. This city is Putin's main target. All of this is to deprive Ukraine of access to its main port.
Putin believes that Odessa is supposedly a historically Russian city. An official speaking to journalists stated that for the head of the Russian Federation, capturing this city is the main goal of the war against Ukraine.
These conclusions were drawn by the Financial Times. They are also supported by the Institute for the Study of War. There they drew attention to recent statements by Russian officials, which prove that Russia has not changed its intentions to destroy the Ukrainian state. This also includes the occupation of Odessa. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov on the 30th of June responded to a statement made by Odessa Mayor Hennady Trukhanov on the 27th of June, in which Trukhanov said that Odessa is not a Russian city and has its own history. In response, Peskov stated that Odessa's history is inextricably linked with Russia. And Putin's aide, Vladimir Medinsky, stated on the 30th of June that Russians and Ukrainians are one people with a shared historical homeland. He referred to the ancient Rus lands on both sides of the Dnipro, as well as Novorossiya and Crimea. According to analysts, these statements point to the scale of Russia's territorial ambitions. It sounds threatening, especially when such things are reported by Western media. But can Russia really carry out its plans?
Probably everyone has lost count of how many times Putin and his circle have planned to attack Odessa again. And accordingly, we see that the Russian leadership is trying to create yet another wave of information. Very often this coincides with the fact that Russia has no significant victories on the battlefield. There is nothing to present, including to the domestic audience, to Russian citizens. And accordingly, they need to fill this information vacuum somehow.
At the same time, it is likely that Putin really does plan to capture Odessa. And this brings us to the most important point, the capabilities of Russia. You can say and plan whatever you want, but do you have the strength? The Russians have only 2 options for an offensive on Odessa. The first is a ground operation. The occupiers cannot advance from Transnistria. The number of troops there is dismal. It is impossible to transfer more. And in fact, one of the reasons for occupying Odessa, which was mentioned earlier, is the corridor to Transnistria. Thus, for the Russians to launch an offensive on the Ukrainian city, they would have to recapture Kherson, then move toward Mykolaiv, and only from there advance on Odessa. The route is so long that it sounds like science fiction. The second option is an amphibious landing operation. But the Russians no longer have any ships left in the Black Sea. And overall, during the full-scale war, their fleet has been significantly reduced. Therefore, this route is even less likely than the land route.
From a military standpoint, and what prerequisites, even minimal ones, exist today to talk about possible offensives or attacks on Odessa. Attacks on Odessa are already ongoing, as I said, every day, every night. These are missiles, these are attack drones. And what kind of naval landing operation can Russia carry out today? They could carry one out, but only one sea, and then they'd end up at the bottom of the sea. A ground operation, an airborne operation, accordingly today, there isn't a single component that would allow us to even begin talking about implementing these so-called plans.
Putin may indeed consider Odessa his main objective, and undoubtedly he wants to capture it. But at the start of the full-scale war, Kharkiv and Kyiv were also such objectives, and we all know how that ended for Putin's soldiers. And back then, the situation was more favorable for the occupiers.
Well then, now let's analyze the situation on the Kramatorsk and Toretsk fronts. The enemy is becoming more ferocious here as well. On the Kramatorsk front, Ukrainian forces repelled one enemy attack in the direction of Bilahora. On the Toretsk front, the enemy attacked our troops' positions 3 times in the areas of Rusin Yar, Yablonivka, and towards Pleshivka. According to Ukraine's main intelligence directorate, Russia is producing nearly 100 Shaheds per day. Now, these are drones with a warhead of 90 kilograms. The enemy spends several days accumulating drones, after which they carry out a concentrated raid, as was recently the case in Kyiv and the Kyiv region. At the same time, this very raid can occur in several waves, reinforced by drones, decoys, and missiles. What should Ukrainians expect next? TSN correspondent IHR Bondarenko analyzed this together with experts.
The Russians are setting new records every week for the number of their audacious terrorist attacks. The latest 537 aerial attack vehicles in a single night. Shaheds, Kinjals, Iskandars and Kalibers are flying and hitting residential buildings, critical infrastructure, schools and industrial enterprises. Just last week, the enemy launched 114 missiles, nearly 1,300 drones and 1,100 guided aerial bombs. The Kremlin continues to intensify its terror despite all the world's calls for a ceasefire.
This is an Oreshnik.
EU Special Envoy for Sanctions Implementation David O'Sullivan is being shown the remains of a Russian ballistic Oreshnik. This is almost the only Russian missile manufactured by the terrorist state without foreign components back in Soviet times. The rest of the enemy's cruise weaponry is 90% assembled from foreign parts. And despite the sanctions, the Russians continue to ramp up production.
In the Russian Federation. In Russia, the key factor in producing Shahids is precisely the speed at which they can be assembled from available components. Already at 2 factories, they're producing nearly 100 units per day. And that's just Shaheds, not counting decoys.
Strike drones have now become the main force for the Russians during air attacks. Recently, Shaheds have started flying at altitudes of 2 to 3 kilometers to avoid being hit by Ukrainian mobile groups. The UAVs attack selected targets in a concentrated manner, with attacks on a single target often lasting several hours. The air assault is then finished off with cruise and ballistic missiles to inflict maximum casualties on rescuers who are trying to evacuate the wounded at that time. The Russians use this kind of aerial terror scenario on a weekly basis.
Right now we see such large-scale launches about once every 3 to 5 days. I'm more than certain that we can now give an approximate estimate, 2 to 2,500 per month. How much can they scale this up? Well, I think up to 3,000 or 4,000, that's a completely realistic figure. Somewhere around November, I think, maybe even sooner.
Per day?
Per month. So that would mean that every 2 or 3 days we'll see a launch of about 500 Shaheds. And by autumn, maybe even sooner, we need to have an answer to this problem.
Anti-aircraft drones could become one of the answers to massive Shahed attacks. Ukrainian drones have been successfully shooting down enemy reconnaissance UAVs for almost a year. However, the first evidence of Shaheds being shot down by anti-drone systems appeared only a month ago. For example, the Sting Interceptor drone, equipped with a thermal imaging camera, was able to catch up with a Shahed above the clouds and successfully take it down. Other instances of such destruction are also appearing online.
If only we had theirs.
Yeah, only we had theirs.
Ukrainian developers are actively testing domestically produced anti-aircraft drones. Unlike FPV drones, interceptor drones need to be much faster, and Ukrainian engineers have developed, among other things, unique propellers that have no analogs in the world and can withstand high speeds.
This is the very drone we position as a Shahed destroyer. This drone has a maximum speed of 355 kilometers per hour. It has been tested and allows us to engage targets like the Shahed.
Anti-aircraft drones are 10 times cheaper than Shahed, so their use is much more cost-effective. However, their dependence on weather conditions significantly limits their operational use. That's why methods for shooting down strike drones are being expanded.
What should we use to shoot down Shaheds? We have anti-aircraft drones, but that's not enough to cover everything. We never received the 20,000 missiles from Trump. We're testing the laser development Trident, which could at least deflect them from their targets. The tests there were conducted at a range of 10 kilometers. There is a turret in development specifically against Shaheds, automated and integrated with artificial intelligence. And what they've started doing now is deploying army aviation aside from Mirage and F-16 aircraft, of course. And they've become interested in light aircraft.
In Ukraine, they're considering the possibility of installing electronic warfare systems on light aircraft. One of the likely options is the Slovak Shark. It should fly over a group of Russian UAVs, suppress them with electronic warfare systems, and divert them from their targets. If the tests are successful, military experts urge that the idea should be scaled up as quickly as possible. At the moment, Russian terrorists are declaring their intention to assemble 500 Shaheds and decoy drones daily. Ukrainian soldiers are ready to take on the challenge if there is a government order, which means funding to increase domestic production. The arms race has entered yet another dangerous phase.
And now let's move to the Kupansk and Lyman sectors of the front. Let's be honest, these are sacred targets for Putin and his entire gang. Accordingly, the situation here is also extremely tense. On the Kupiansk axis, the defense forces repelled 3 enemy assaults in the areas of Kondrashivka, Zarizove, and towards Petropavlivka. Another clash is still ongoing. The aggressor attacked our troops' positions 11 times on the Lyman axis near Novi Mir, Hekivka, Redkodub, Karpivka, Kolodyazi, Zelena Dolina, Torske, Serebrianka, and in the direction of Dronivka. And now, another extremely important topic. In the Sumy region, the armed forces of Ukraine managed to push the occupiers away from the regional center. Meanwhile, in the Dnipropetrovsk region, the enemy is already terrorizing the local population with FPV drones and tube artillery. What is happening on the front line at this very moment? Find out in our report.
The armed forces of Ukraine have delivered powerful strikes on temporarily occupied Crimea. Thus, on the Kerch Peninsula, S-300 and S-400 air defense systems, as well as radar stations, were hit. In Saki, Ukrainian drones successfully turned Russian equipment into scrap metal. The Pantsir S-1 air defense missile gun system, the Niobium radar, the SV, the Pechora 3 coastal radar, the Protivnik GE radar, as well as a Su-30 fighter jet, were destroyed. Powerful explosions also rocked the occupied cities of Donetsk and Luhansk.
Something's on fire? Damn! Who?
The logistics of the occupiers were hit, most likely a building where drones and electronic warfare equipment were being produced, as well as an oil depot. 9 aircraft were used, Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles were launched, and impacts, fires and destruction were recorded. We're talking about industrial zones, warehouses and military facilities. Warehouses for enemy equipment and arms depots were hit. In the occupied part of the Zaporizhia region, GUR drones have effectively paralyzed the occupiers' logistics. On the 26th of June, the railway track was destroyed. And when the Russian military repaired the tracks and sent a military freight train, the GUR struck again. One of the key logistics routes of the occupation army in the Zaporizhia region is once again blocked. The situation is tense on the border between Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk regions. In the Novopavlivka direction, the situation is constantly changing. The Russians want to enter the Dnipropetrovsk region, but the Ukrainian armed forces are not allowing the enemy to amass near the area.
These one-off raids bring neither tactical nor strategic advantage, but they are a troubling sign of a deteriorating situation. We saw a similar situation near Kotlярivka and Orikove, where there was a lot of talk about the enemy advancing into Dnipropetrovsk, but Ukrainian fighters have managed to hold back the enemy's onslaught, and now no one is shouting about major advances in that area anymore. OSINT analysts.
The greatest pressure from the Russian army is currently observed along the line from Novopil to Novozergivka. There have also been recorded cases of Russians flying FPV drones into the region. One of the latest incidents, a bus was on its way to pick up families from the Sinanikov district. At that moment, the Russians attacked the bus with a bomber drone. In the Sumy region, the Ukrainian armed forces managed to stop the occupiers' advance. For the first time, the General Staff has shown the front line in this region on a map. The map shows which part of the Sumy region has been captured by the Russian army. Against the backdrop of Moscow's announcement of its intention to create a so-called buffer zone on the border with Ukraine, Russian troops continue active operations in the north of the Sumy region. The military administration has confirmed the occupation by Russian forces of 4 border settlements: Novenke, Basivka, Veseliivka and Juravka.
The advance of Russian troops in the border area of Sumy region has been halted as of this week. The line of combat engagement has been stabilized. In certain areas, our units are successfully employing active defense tactics and liberating Ukrainian land in the border region. On the North Slobodansky and Kursk directions, we have once again pinned down about 50,000 Russian personnel, including elite airborne and marine brigades. The General Staff in its official statement confirms our intentions to control the situation in order to drive the enemy out of the Sumy region of Ukraine, push them back into Russia, and possibly even discuss the creation of a buffer zone specifically on the territory of the Kursk region, not, as the enemy wanted, in Sumy.
We are not only successfully repelling attacks, but also striking at military infrastructure. All public events in Izhevsk, Russia have been cancelled for 2 days. Ukrainian drones struck the Kupol factory. This particular enterprise produces the Tor and Odessa air defense systems, as well as Harpy drones.
Oh my gracious God, you are truly and profoundly merciful.
The strike was carried out from more than 1,300 kilometers away. 2 hits and a fire have been recorded. According to statements from the General Staff, the number of such strikes will only increase.
That's all for today. But very soon on Front News, there will be new exclusive reports from our journalists in the hottest spots of the war, brought to you so that you know the truth. This was Vladimir Timoshenko with you. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.